All right, we're live on YouTube. So welcome everyone to the 7th Core Dev call. Bit of a hiatus after DevCon. We have a few things to talk about today. The first is around sort of the new team structure for the GmbH and what this means in technical terms for interface and so on. And the second around some sort of engineering process things that we can improve. And finally on libp2p integration. And then if we have some time after, we can talk about general things if there's something people want to talk about. So I guess, Igor, do you want to start off with the first point on new team structure and what this means for technical terms?
Yeah, it's not really any kind of a presentation. I hope that everyone has read this document that's been there for a while ago, but just to recap, if someone didn't, we'll change our teams slightly. So essentially, there would be some areas of responsibility, like there's a key card, the apps, wallet, chat, desktop, and core. As of now, there's 6 proposed areas, and so all the responsibilities that used to be in the core team, in the big core team, they are split between this. But that's you probably already heard a couple of times. So what I was trying to think of and what I wanted to discuss here is that how it will affect things like our code base, our repositories, our processes, and our tooling. So what I have just a few points in here to make is that usually there's, I don't know whose law is this, that the code structure should follow the team structure. I don't know if someone remembers. Tell me, but essentially the biggest pain point before, and probably the biggest pain point right now, and the biggest kind of a productivity penalty we'll get in the places where we have to synchronize team attempts. And it's especially exaggerated since we all working remotely and it's not sitting in the same office. So that means that, for me at least, it might make sense to a little bit, even if it means some duplicate work, but to separate our kind of tools and maybe some code modules and things like that a little bit more, so they intersect less. So we don't. So things like CI, for instance, that maybe desktop and mobile might have separate CIs with separate to them, even though it might be again double effort. But in that case, there shouldn't be much of a overlap with as long as this tooling is working, should be that much of an overlap if some team wants to change something and another doesn't. Things like that. So that's essentially all I wanted to point out. I don't know how sensible you think it is, but if someone has any opinion, please let's discuss it just right now.
So one first question: who is so Igor sort of taking upon himself to be the team for this new core team? Who else would self-identify as some form of team lead, whether it's chat or wallet or desktop, anything like this? And maybe you want to say sort of your point of view. So, for example, Vitaly is for desktop, Goran for wallet, and maybe there are other teams that have been formed. I don't know exactly what the latest state is. Anyone? Oh.
Vitaly cannot unmute.
Actually, Goran's not here. So.
All right, Bruce. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you are here. So don't let me speak for you then.
Yeah. All right. So, what was the question?
The question, if I can sum it up, the question was modular. Igor brought up modularization between increasing the separation between the different teams and reflecting that in the code base in terms of, and he mentioned specifically CI. separating CI for his example was CI for desktop and
all right.
for chat and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, from my point of view, specifically with respect to CI, the problem isn't modules, it's platforms, really. Because right now, whenever we push PR, it's like we're playing blackjack. You know, at least one platform build is likely to fail. You only don't know which one. If you know what I mean, like the build could be perfectly fine, and it could fail on desktop Linux, for example, for some obscure reason. That's from the CI point of view.
I think maybe broader than the CI point of view is also just figuring out the interface in terms of responsibilities. So it's very clear what each team is responsible for and what sort of that interface looks like. And then there will be questions like that, more detail with CI and so on. But I think the first priority should be to figure out the interface in terms of responsibilities.
So we're talking about internal APIs, which is something I think we agreed to, follow as a guideline. So for example, each module would have its own API, which would be external in the sense of the module, but it would be used by, for example, other modules. For like Wallet would offer an API for chat or for browser, but it would also consume the API of, I don't know, chat, for example. But I don't see how this what this has to do at all with for example, CI.
No, just I had a little bit of a broader question in general, because it's not only like CI. It's not, we shouldn't focus just on the CI. It's just one thing that I came to mind. But in general, like from the technical perspective, okay, we know we know what the teams are. We know the responsibilities of these teams. But these are like more or less on the high level. But how does it practically affect day-to-day software development, right? So do we want to split our code base a little bit more? Do we want, and the same thing for the tooling, because it's all like, it's like, if you look at the whole process, there's tooling, okay. There is like,
Yeah, okay, no, now I get it. It actually does have something to do with the CI in the sense that a small glitch or a missed typo in a PR from, I don't know, one completely unrelated part of the code would break the build for everyone. Like everything is in the same pot. That's what you were saying.
That is, yeah, that's one thing. Another thing that we are, for instance, yeah, again, for the platforms, as you told, we're trying to use one tool for all the platforms, which might not be the optimal solution. And then it's like, we might have different types of CI and different, things for different platforms as well, and things like that. And yeah, essentially isolating the code structure and things like into modules, yes, we talk about.
I guess one is sorry. I guess one example would be, if you separated the chat protocol into a separate repo instead of living in status React, which has been discussed previously.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the action points. I mean, if so, first thing I want to discuss, if to reach a consensus, if we should do this, and then maybe just to try to draft some steps, maybe simple steps that we can go towards this goal.
I'd be curious to hear Bruce's opinion on this as well, because I know you wrote up some stuff on Discuss that touch on this. What are your thoughts on how would you attack it?
Yeah. And again, like I still am making my way through the entire code base. It's a long novel, so it's taking a little while. But I think they're like different. I think we could all agree that there are different degrees of separation, right? And I think the person speaking before me was alluding to that you can take steps towards this separation without it being drastic. And so, and so personally, I would, again, I think the person who spoke before me, I think it was Igor, or was it Pedro? I think the idea is, you start, first of all, some of these things are hard to separate right now, right? Like some of them are really hard to separate. And so you start at the code base level and, within the same repo, and you start pulling these things apart, and then you see if you can actually can you separate it? Some things may not be practically made separate, and some things may be made separate. And the question of taking it to another repo, right, is a big question, right? That is not necessarily an easy lift. And if it was, it probably means that you're only separating out a very small amount of functionality, right? Like you're separating out a thin wrapper around the Go library. And then, what do you gain from that, right? So, and so the idea is it'd be great to separate out a larger piece of functionality, right? We want to separate, and so at the highest level, right, is a React component, which you could drop in, and that's chat, and from there down, if you could achieve a sensible degree of separation, you're including a lot. And you're separating a lot from everything else. Does that make sense? What do people think in response to that?
Yeah, one specific question. For example, if right now the overall code base consists of two large parts, like the React part and the Go part. So in a way, we already have this separation where the technology kind of demanded it. Now, if you wanted, say, to split React part further, how would you deal with the shared stuff, with components and things like that? Or is that possibly something that you would separate first? For example, when you say, one part that's chat alone, how in that case would we deal with the stuff that's shared by chat and wallet?
So this is right. So that's coordinated at a higher level, right? So like like for example, I think it was Eric just did a lot of work to move all the subscriptions in the chat window up higher. Like he moved them up higher. All right, and then basically, essentially making the components below, like by separate, right? So now all the components below are stupid. They're just getting passed data, right? They're not subscribing. They know nothing about Reframe. They're just getting passed data, or they do know about Reframe because they're firing events to Reframe and stuff like that. But the idea is just making a bigger component that's stupid, right? In the sense that it doesn't know about the greater world, but it does know, we do know it fires events and it accepts data, right? So that its interface internally is it fires events. The borderline is it fires events and it accepts data, right? And it manages some data internally. And so the shared data is updated by firing events, and the data that's consumed that's shared is passed into it. The kind of straight up, component borderline. Of course, again, I'm speaking in ideals.
Speaking of ideals, it would be really cool if we could. It might require a lot of changes, but if we can sort of start to move things like the wallet and other things into more of something that you can replace, like it's more like a dApp. It's useful for lots of things. It's useful both from a sort of general separation of concern kind of point of view that we are working on. It's also useful in the sense that if we have a network and people might want to have a different so-called wallet abstraction that's not as wallet-centric. Maybe it's more around collectibles. It's useful for App Store approvals and so on, and just treating the transaction signing as part of the core. And then the wallet is just another dApp that's maybe more polished and so on. What are people's thoughts on the feasibility of moving to that? I know we used to have it, but then we moved away from it.
Yeah. One bit specific question for you, Oscar. When you say dApp, what specifically do you mean?
That's unspecified, right? I mean, it could be just
exactly.
I mean, because it's more of an idea as opposed to a specific way of doing it. It could be like a web dApp. It could be extensions. It could be like some React Native component. I would say that a useful property would be if you can trust minimize it. So transaction signing has some kind of privileged thing where it's clear that this comes on status, so you can install like extensions that are maybe not as trusted, and they are more like a nice UI, because you still need to have some abstraction that's sort of a secure UX for transaction signing and key management and so on. That would be the main criteria, and sort of swappability. What that looks like is unspecified.
Yeah, I asked because we've previously had great deal of confusion around that particular word, dApp. And if I recall well, we couldn't even agree on how to spell it, capitalization and all that.
I mean, the ideal world is to live completely on Web3, right? Which would be, you would live on Swarm and be some kind of content addressable thingy, right? That would be the ideal thing. But then how we go to there might be several paths, right?
Yeah, but we are not talking specifically about web apps with Web3 access. That's too specific, correct?
Possibly, yeah.
All right.
So, morning, guys. One of the reasons I've been driving the protocol work so hard is because it allows different apps to come about. But as far as the status app goes itself, if you think of it as an operating system, it shouldn't be doing that much. And that brings several benefits. Some have been discussed in the channel, like responsibilities and who can attack the status organization and so on. But as long as the app itself is neutral and only provides a rich extension API, a lot of these trade-offs on principles can be delegated to app developers as well, so that we can have a rich ecosystem of different priorities, as long as our app itself and possibly the extensions that we write are in line with the status principles. So as far as that line of thinking is concerned, I mean, if you look at Android as an operating system, you have both like the Facebook Messenger, which is the most egregious from a privacy point of view, and then you have all the way down to Briar, which does private chat very well. And likewise for wallet, we could have a multitude of wallets supplied, but that sort of depends on the status core app being developed with this pure operating system mindset.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, go on.
Okay. I mean, I think so. It's, to me, it seems like the last two comments, right? Like about it, like these overarching ideas of, making things like, I would say that's making things. There's an ideal, right, of making things super general, like operating system, moving to a dApp, and these things are like these themes seem to conflict, right, with some fundamental friction points with where we are right now. And so I don't know, like in terms of these seem like far-reaching future ideals that don't speak to what we're going to do for the next 6 months. Like, now maybe I'm wrong, but But in terms of moving, like while moving to a DApp is an ideal, it doesn't get us closer to a functioning, well-behaved native wallet, native wallet, because the technology, isn't really there. And in terms of, as far as I know, if somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see either extensions or a web DApp behaving in any way that people would want a wallet to behave right now on a native platform. And and the platform is and moving, like, and so when I hear that, I feel like maybe it's confusing to me. Like, it makes me feel uncertain about the goals of what we're trying to do. Are we trying to deliver on the things we said? I find it confusing because I don't see those technologies as mature and available for us to do native, some of these native things that we really like. Now, what I do see as a possibility, right, is moving again, making the APIs a solid boundary. And if you want to move that boundary into Go or whatever, and making that, again, in raising up the protocol to the point where it's more general, and again, making the UI less knowledgeable. But right now, I mean, things are approaching that already. It's just UIs are difficult, and they require a lot of code to get people, they require a lot of code and a lot of tweaking to get them right. Anybody else have something?
Can I say something, Bruce? I guess, so speaking to your point about these things being sort of like general and idealistic, let's look at a very, very specific threat model at the moment, which I think has brought up the discussion about moving the wallet to a DApp, and that's KYC and AML and plausible deniability about whether we're a financial service or not. So if it's not a question of moving it into a DApp, how do we accomplish that with our code base, that we create some sort of separation between status as a company or as a DAO and having a wallet that provides access to financial services, where it looks like the direction is going, we would have to provide and collect customer data. So that's a real practical, use case about that we need to solve. So where do we go to do that based on our code base from your point of view?
Yeah, can I jump in here? Yeah.
No, just go ahead.
Yeah. Practically, one of the sources of confusion is the definition of a wallet. What is a wallet? I've seen at least three separate, well accepted definitions. First, wallet as a safe storage for your keys. That's like the most minimalistic definition of a wallet, like literally a key store. The second one is a client that you use to access Ethereum and to send transactions in the most general sense of transactions. So that's the third one. So that's the second one is practically a UI for Ethereum, a client app, right? And the third one is a bit creepy. That's like a server-side app that manages your own account for you. I don't know. There's a bunch of examples of those.
Yeah, but
so
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So practically, before we start this discussion, we need to agree on, when we say wallet, what specifically does that mean, and to what extent does it fit into any of the existing pigeonholes made by the regulatory bodies and so on. The one interpretation of wallet I've seen among users is something where you put your assets. So basically, one guy literally, asked me, he said something like, I migrated my wallet from Toshi to Status. I opened my Toshi and I can still see my tokens there. How come? The guy literally just recovered the account. So in the minds of a part of our users, wallet is a container where your assets are stored, which is also kind of technically incorrect in the sense that the assets are stored on the blockchain on every single full node out there, and the wallet is like a key store or a client app that you use to access those funds. So when we say wallet, we need to agree what specifically do we mean by it. For example, right now, wallet from the first definition, as in a key store, is stored within the app. And the only way we can get rid of it is to export it to a card, optionally. Right. Wallet is the second definition, client app for the Ethereum. Again, we need to agree to what extent do we need to keep or remove features in order not to qualify as a financial service. Because, you know, if you want to interact, if you want to mutate a chain at all, you have to create transactions in the technical sense. Now, I know there are transactions as much as database transactions are transactions, but still they are called transactions. All right, so you see where I'm getting with this. Practically, it's like we need to set a bar exactly how much do we want to offer natively, and how much can we remove and put to some kind of an extension or an optional, upgradable, downloadable, or whatever part. Because some things we definitely need to have internally. One of the things I was thinking about is, I mean, names are powerful. Names define things. We may even rename some of the concepts, which could be even necessary from a UX perspective, because a hardware wallet and the wallet as a tab in the app where you can see your balance, those are two completely different things. Both are called wallet. And wallet to someone who is non-technical is something that has to do with money, therefore financial. Can we give them different names?
Yes, so I mean, if you think about, so signing is essentially a notary function without the notary. And that's separate from the financial transactions, which is something like a vault or a safe. So maybe we need to separate those and talk about signatory functionality, notarization in that sense, and then asset storage in a vault. And if we can separate those things so that we're not only the providers of them, and those things live elsewhere, and our application just accesses them, it might be a way that we can accomplish that.
Yeah, it's a browser. It's a transaction browser.
It's a different. If we're providing an API, we probably even fall under the definition of providing financial services in some
possibly. But again, when you say browser, like, what is a browser? In the broader sense, it's a client app, right? A consumer of some kind of a protocol.
The wallet is by all intents and purposes just a password manager with a little bit of functionality around it in terms of like deriving passwords and signing things. That's literally it. And the messaging should be around that, because the actual things of value don't live anywhere on those keys. It's just that we're just holding the keys that grant access to the things of value. And that's a problem. Like the definitions of these things that we're worried about in terms of regulation is a problem with the regulatory bodies, which we cannot get around. So like, how do you move forward? Do you change your signaling to deal with the regulation, or do you signal appropriately to the technology and hope that they change? I think that's the real question here, is because like the whole field has this issue. Calling it a wallet makes it worse. So that they're more ignorant about how it actually works, and they can't reason about it appropriately. But you move forward? Because that's what everyone calls it. Like I personally am very strongly of the opinion that we change the names so that they match the intuition of what the thing actually does. Calling them password managers, key stores, key cards, etc., gives the users a better intuition of what's going on, so that when they say, I recovered my wallet in status when I see my assets, how does that work? If they were said, I brought my keychain over to status and I can see my assets, that makes sense because now I still have my keys. And removing it makes sense. Like, we don't know. We can have ideas around removing it, but at the end of the day, status has to have some type of access to keys. So there needs to be some native support. Unless we build the entire, like all of it.
Yeah, and on the other side of the spectrum, status also needs to have access to the network. So, you know, there's like keys on one side, there's the network on the other side. If you remove the ability to transact from an Ethereum client, and if you make it optional, something that's achievable through a plugin, that's a lot like saying that if you want to keep the OS analogy, that's a lot like saying that we want to make file system access optional or pluggable in an OS, because technically blockchain is the file system of the Ethereum big ass machine. So, you know.
So in that case, like the actual financial services lies within giving the availability for that option, right? Like that file system access is the actual service, because that's what the logic is of getting access to those things. Whereas the keys are just keys, right? We have Whisper keys, we have wallet keys, and if without the functionality, they all look the exact same. And so the app itself is the access to financial services if someone deems that what it is.
And isn't there, I mean, in the possible deniability that letting people install a dApp, I mean, the regulatory bodies will move these goalposts continuously, and we're not in any different of a position than any other wallet out there or any other, like these goalposts are going to move, and who the heck knows? I mean, the what if here and the timeline here again is moving to a dApp. What does that buy you? Like it looks like there's a wallet there, So I mean, you could say that maybe there's a better legal argument, but I mean, how, like, if the regulations start falling, they're I don't know, just an opinion.
I agree. I think that the technicalities of whether it's a dApp or not in the eyes of someone like Apple or a government is going to be irrelevant. They're going to put the hammer down on status because of how it's operated, by us turning around and saying, well, technically, it's a third-party dApp, and it's not going to make a difference. You can access this stuff, which is, let's say, not allowed, is going to be the end ruling. I don't think technicalities are what's going to get us off the hook in under regulatory circumstances. It may delay it a bit more, but yeah, I agree with Bruce and Corey about what both of you have said.
Well, then the function, like we need to push the signaling more, because that's what gives us the plausible deniability. It's like, what are you talking about? It's not a financial services app. It's a password manager, and that's how we treat it.
Agree.
Yeah, but likewise, right? By doing it this way, you isolate the controversial behavior from the non-controversial behavior. Like building a general browser isn't really that controversial. Building, say, a finance app is. And isolating the two allows, first of all, each parts of those apps to compromise less on their own goals. And in the event of issues, it also moves potential attack surfaces to separate entities, which are each smaller and therefore less impactful on the overall app. So you can imagine that, I don't know, status finance wallets gets attacked, but not status the chat. whatever, right?
Yeah, just one question. We're talking about two separate classes of attackers. One, the likes of Apple, and the other, the likes of financial regulatory bodies. Now, specifically, do you know that Apple doesn't actually need a reason or a cause to shut you down as per their terms of service? And they don't even have to explain that after they shut you down.
I don't think that was Jasek's point. Like I think this is applicable in lots of markets, also the Chinese App Store. Like there will be different circumstances where different things will be controversial, right? And having separation of concern allows us to be more flexible, and you can distribute app in different ways. Imagine if the Apple II came with a BitTorrent client pre-installed, that maybe would be banned because it was sort of against the copyright way or whatever. Like it's about separating out piece of functionality. And if we take the idea of status being an operating system for Ethereum seriously, then it kind of implies this type of design to some extent.
Yeah, the point is that in one place the chat will be sensitive where privacy is an issue. In another part, the wallet will be, and in the third one, whatever will be, right? Some random app on that runs on Ethereum. And if you have both wallet and chat and the other functionality in one single app, each and every one of those is cause to shut down the whole thing. So in China, we'll get shut down because of the chat. In the Apple Store, will be shut down because of the wallet, because it gives you access to financial transactions without giving Apple a slice, and so on and so forth. The end result is that the app will be shut down everywhere.
So, I mean,
does it make sense?
Essentially, a suite of products, as you're pointing out, Jacek, and then we can go all the way back to really the first time that I heard about Status was a mobile OS for Ethereum. And so, to what degree can we return to those roots, both in the code base and in our signaling? And then seems to be a direction that we should look pretty seriously at.
Yeah, and that doesn't really prevent us from developing a quality chat and a quality wallet and a quality integrated experience between these two. But it's the mindset, it's the approach, it's the culture that we have in developing, and that will lead to like this shared understanding of the fact of what it is we're building, that will lead in every one of us making small decisions that push in this direction. That's important. That's especially important in a decentralized organization, right? That you have this shared idea, so that we can, I don't know if trust is the right word here, but that we can be comfortable with allowing each and everybody to decide on the many small decisions that lead up to a quality whole. Like for that to happen, we need to have this shared understanding of why it is we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and why it is we're doing it in that particular way.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I hope I understand like everyone correctly, that it's important that we are having some shared goal, but it doesn't mean that we'll just throw everything out of the window that we have right now and just start everything from scratch. And but if we, in making some decisions, we should, technical decisions as well, we should just look at this goal. So like even like including, if we improve separation and like internal APIs like between the modules, even if they are technically not dApps and not like separate repositories and stuff like this, we'll learn what APIs are necessary, right? So otherwise we can theorize on the APIs, but it will be our first users and like implementing some internal APIs and separation between components, then it would be much easier to just make those external after proper security work on them. But yeah, things like that. So it doesn't mean that if we discuss like that, it's nice to have this pretty radical split that we should like do it like tomorrow or something. But it would be nice if...
Also,
oh yeah, please continue.
Regarding the financial risk and the App Store risks, just wanted to add that our legal counsel, Sonia, is researching the topic and working with other law firms on a legal determination on the best way to proceed with this. And possibly, it could make sense to wait for, precedents with other apps before making a decision right now. But I think we do have a little bit of time, and that there is some work ongoing to look deeper into it from a compliance and regulatory point of view.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. I wanted to ask a question about this modularization and component stuff, because so we have lots of functionality, so we can kind of imagine it all on a two-dimensional plane, so to speak. And right now we kind of split it along the y-axis, so we have different layers of app that correspond to different parts of functionalities, but we also have like the x-axis that corresponds to, let's say, the levels in the technological stack. So as in order to diminish and decrease this level of team sync required, as Igor explained it, so it would be really nice that whoever the features are going to be implemented by multiple teams potentially, right? So we both need to ensure that the feature is, once it is delivered, it is either a separate component or as separate as possible, that it has a well-defined API, most likely with some nice architecture decision record attached to it as a documentation. But also, as I understand, it needs to pass sort of verification steps for each of the stakeholders, let's say the guardians on each of those tech stack levels, right? Is that something that we are having already or are going to have? Because given the at least two-dimensional nature of the product, each parts of each feature, they have to basically to go through two pairs of eyes, both the feature implementers themselves, who guarantee that the feature will be a complete piece of functionality wise, but also from the respective, let's say, key holder of the technology stack that this feature will touch upon. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. It's what we even, I guess we have discussed it with Nabil, but it was more or less like an ephemeral idea that there should be some stakeholder, at least for mobile and desktop, who will have to test and verify that provided functionality, let's say for the wallet and for the chat or for whatever, is actually implemented in so implemented well according to the standards and the quality. That might be like the QA people or and the developers, because some people know how the code should look like, and some people know how it should work and things like that. Maybe end design might be there as well. But that was more or less very. I don't think we have it right now. I mean, we have something on the QA side actually, but we don't have anyone from QA team right now on the call. Do we? Oh, Anna, you're here. I see you're here. So.
I was just thinking that whatever features we implement, they need to have like really strict boundaries in terms of description of what they do, expected inputs and outputs, so that once a feature is developed and code-wise, this might entail in multiple PRs, whatever, but this has to be really encapsulated. Not only code-wise, but also, let's say, kind of organizationally or documentation-wise, so that people know what this does and how it's implemented, how does it interface with other parts of the code. Because right now we just have like let's say an unstructured stream of PRs. Whoever is dealing with the code, they have to parse this stream of PRs or use Git history to understand how something happened, what are the limitations, and they have to look at multiple places to dig out all of the important information. So it would be really crucial if given this additional documentation for features, so that we minimize this time required for searching and gluing together different pieces.
But that's one of the, I guess this kind of transfers us to the next section that Oscar wanted to talk about. That's we basically need better PRs, right? Because if a PR requires you to do git blame for 2 hours to be able to review it, then probably it makes sense to just reject this PR and tell that that's not enough information.
So I think, we've been talking about this first item for 40 minutes or so. I think it's an important conversation, but we should probably move on. So in terms of following up with this sort of operating system, DApp, wallet API versus product thinking, like what are people's thoughts in terms of how we best should follow up on this? Because I agree with sort of what I think Jacek was talking about it, that it's, if we don't have sort of one shared mind on this matter, there's a risk that we're pulling in slightly different directions. And that doesn't sort of preclude, like even having the operating system thing, that doesn't preclude us having product-focused teams and these types of things. But what should we do in terms of continuing this conversation and then coming to some kind of shared understanding? What are people's thoughts?
It would be interesting if there was like either teams. I think if people, I think it would serve communicating more quickly and effectively if maybe we had to discuss where people or teams posted like whiteboard drawings or paper drawings or something like that. And I don't know, some way, and then maybe having another meeting where people could talk about the specifics of what they have in their mind. Because, I think there may be 15 different pictures in people's minds of what this means and how it could look, right?
So I think that's a good point. So whoever sort of wants to have some ideas around that can post something on Discuss, and then we can talk about there, and then we can bring it up at the next call or have a dedicated call. Does that sound good to people? I don't know if we have any designers on this call, but whatever. Everyone can just draw an MS Paint or something if they want. All right, cool. So I guess moving on to the second point, unless someone wants to say some final words on that topic.
I just wanted to ask who wants to write the initial Discuss post. Is there any volunteer who want to write it?
Whoever feels divine inspiration can do async coordination of that, maybe. All right, cool. So second one is around sort of engineering process failures. And I think this touches on several topics, but the idea is that we want to sort of have higher standards for general engineering practice. And I think this applies on several layers. One is in terms of good issue descriptions and too big PRs and automated tests still not being something developers can rely on, too many pull requests open, and so on. I think there's lots of things we can talk about here. I don't know, I think Pedro also had some general thoughts. I guess we can leave it as sort of an open table in terms of taking this opportunity of this sort of reorganization to setting ourselves up for higher standards and sort of evolving as an engineering organization, and not just sort of going back and forth and having the same conversation we had a year ago when it comes to PR size and making issue problem descriptions and these types of things. I don't know, Pedro, do you want to start with what you were thinking about?
Yeah, well, one thing I mentioned this morning in another meeting was that we need to up the level from the beginning, from issue description. We need to, the person who is writing an issue description needs to think about all the stakeholders down the line. So could be the system tester, the developer, the reviewer. Try to make it as complete as possible in terms of information, so that we have more information if we see that an issue needs to be better prepared, a PR needs to be better prepared, that you can have a reason to fail the PR based on the issue itself. So, I mean, it could be a good reason to fail the PR if something is not specified in the issue, and then we have to go and ask product management or the person who wrote the initial issue. But I think we need to be more demanding in terms of the quality of the whole process, not just pull requests, but from beginning to end. It might delay us in the short term, but I think it will increase the speed of the team in the long run. One example.
Yeah, so that's, I wanted to ask for examples. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, this is a stupid example, and it's. I hate to pick on particular examples, but this is a simple one. So it serves as a good demonstration. For instance, the push notifications on the desktop. You probably noticed that there was, the lack of icon. There was this default icon which showed the Z, which meant nothing for status users, and also the text that was showing the push notifications was not very helpful. It didn't say who sent a message or in which chat. I mean, this is something that should have been more specified in the issue that started this implementation, and B, should also have been caught in the pull request review, asking, why do we have this particular icon and not the status icon, and why don't we show? I guess the reason was that the pull request was more based on the technical side. Okay, now we have push notifications, which is the major part of the issue, but I don't see a real reason not to do those final touches. And maybe it wasn't in the specification, but I think it's something that needs to be touched in the pull request review, saying, okay, I see all the work is correct, but we could also add this because it doesn't make sense not to add the status icon or this or that. And this is, of course, a very simple example. It's the simplest I could find, but you could transpose this to other issues, much more complicated. Where, I mean, the lack of unit tests or the lack of system tests, you could say, okay, we fixed this issue. An example could be, for instance, Roman is working on the speeding up the login, which is great, but I hope that we will write system tests or end-to-end tests to verify that we don't have a regression on that. It's just taking things the whole way, and I'm sure that Roman is going to work on or to delegate or whatever, but this is something that is very important, so that we don't 5 months down the line find that some other code change reintroduce this regression. I don't know if it makes sense for you.
Yeah, it does. One thing I'd like to add to what you already said, and I can't stress it enough, we need to have screenshots in PRs. Because some of the things, like the ones you described, become very obvious, very visible to anyone who is reviewing it if they can only see a screenshot. Yeah, of course, you can always run things yourself, but screenshot is really fast way.
I'm actually a big proponent of, if you're reviewing the code, you should run it yourself, and you might find issues with the code. It was just the case this weekend. I was working with Roman to test this database migration, and on my database it showed issues that wasn't showing up in his migration. So I think we need to get more eyes into the pull request. I mean, for the testers, sometimes the technicalities are not visible. For instance, in the simple case of the push notification, maybe the tester thinks, okay, if this wasn't implemented, it's because it was a hard technical issue that the developer can't easily put the status icon on the notification, so it will be left for later, and it wasn't the case. So other colleagues who are reviewing the pull request have more information to decide whether the pull request should pass or if a little bit more work is needed. So we shouldn't leave that also to the testers.
I think one general point here is also I see very few pull requests being rejected, and the same with sort of questioning problem statements and so on. And I think maybe that's easy because people don't want to seem like an asshole, especially if it's like a distributed organization and feels like you're attacking the person. But it's important that right now we have real users, and rejecting a PR is about that code, and it's about sort of caring for code quality, and also gives people a sort of useful signal, right? Because if you get some kind of negative feedback, it tells you that, oh, well, this is something this piece of code can improve, or I can attack this problem better or whatever. And that helps everyone sort of get better. So I've seen it a few times. For example, like I think it was Hester or someone who sort of came in and rejected a PR. And we need more of that, where people sort of just say, hey, I don't think this is good enough. And it's not personal, right? And changing this attitude and making it more acceptable and more encouraged for people to say, I don't think this is good enough, and say why, and then you can have a dialogue, right? But it's about the code, it's about the person. I would really like to see more of that, and people just being more rigorous about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I once worked in a team where one developer took things very personally. Whenever a pull request was rejected, and we had this big meeting saying, the theme was, you are not your code. You have to be able to separate, and it happens to me. Sometimes things I criticize on a pull request, I do it, some other time. This happens to everyone. Sometimes you're just sick of being so deep in the trenches that you want to make the pull request pass, and you just need to have some other people to bring you to discipline and say, okay, it's still not good enough. And make you persevere.
Well, I think that there are sometimes PRs really get stuck in code review I used to have this like a long time ago, for actually quite petty reasons, like maybe some naming and stuff. But I think in general, the question of personally taking PR reviews close to heart is in 90% of cases is basically solved by proper choice of words and stuff. People, I would never be offended by a PR being rejected because there are some reasons. I would rather be, a bit offended if there was some, inappropriate wording. I think that applies generally to everyone. So apart from that, I don't see any reasons really to take PRs personally, and I don't think we have any trouble with regards to inappropriate wording at all. So yeah, maybe that's we just need to turn on a switch inside the head that it's fine to be a bit more strict. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also have an issue of fire and forget bounty PRs, which we also need to basically close and shut down eventually.
So what happened with the review of today? I know you restarted, Goran, but like what did it stop or what?
Yeah, roughly ever since the last time we did the ROD thing. Right now, bots are actually doing a lot of footwork, which is awesome.
So I just saw 2 like pull requests by community members, and they've been hanging there for like a month, and we're just completely neglecting them. And I can't help but feel like we can do this better.
Yeah, we don't really have a guideline how long to keep them. I think that's what we need to agree. Somewhere in the back of my head, I would typically close them off if it's been more than a month and the person doesn't reply to the ping.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that they did something wrong. I'm saying we did something wrong. Like in one of the PRs, it looks like it was passed on to QA, but then it ended up in a contributor column with no action or any ping for the reviewer. So it's been hanging there for a month, and the contributor is probably just waiting for us and too timid to ask us what's going on. And this happened for two PRs that's more than a month old. I just looked at all those PRs. And that's just us dropping the ball. Like, this is not the contributor's fault. I'm sure there are as well.
Yeah.
It's us not being on top of the queue, right?
If the if it was moved to contributor automatically, it means like something. I mean, the most obvious reason would be that developed moved forward and introduced some merge issue, and then the build fails. And
in this specific case, I think it was because it was
least,
yeah, it was one person who approved and one who left comment. But I think the point is more that the idea with something like Review of the Day is to catch these things. So looking at the oldest PRs and just pinging if nothing has happened, and having some maintainers where we make sure that these things don't fall behind the cracks. And sometimes that means closing a PR, absolutely. But yeah.
My point was that probably the contributor received an email saying, the build failed or whatever. But yeah, I agree that's probably not enough, and we should follow up.
Yeah, a couple of times I've sent at least a couple of pings where the contributor didn't reply at all. So in that case, the only thing that makes sense to do is to wait a couple of days and close it.
Yeah, and that's probably fine. I think that's okay, right? Yeah. It's just like we have a lot of PRs that are 2 months old, and we didn't do the pinging. So I think if we can introduce some way of making sure that we have some
Should we extend the filter of the bot to also close PRs and not just issues?
I think we should actually shift the stale bot to PRs, and especially the bounty ones.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It would also.
Yeah, I think actually that's a much better use case for it than
because then you have 1 week before it actually closes both parties receive an advert, some information that the PR is going to be closed in 1 week.
Yeah, and it's even automated, so there's no ambiguity around wording. It's definitely not personal. It's a machine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. The other thing around something you said, Pedro, like when we receive an incoming PR, we are reviewing it, and maybe everything is technically correct, but maybe we want to add something to the scope because it makes sense at the moment. I'm not sure that's a fair thing to do to bounty PRs. Let's say you are solving a bounty. You submit a PR, and it had some kind of a scope, no matter how well defined it was, but it had some scope, and you estimated some certain effort, and you compared it to the reward of the bounty. Now, if that increases over time after you have already invested effort into the bounty, you get to the sunk cost dilemma. Whether or not you just drop it or you add additional effort. I mean, in that case, actually, the fault is entirely on our side because it wasn't properly scoped or properly defined at all initially. But I don't think that's a fair thing to do in the case of a bounty PR.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of core contributors.
Can we bring back?
Yeah.
Can we bring back the review of the what was blocking it? Why do you think it was dropped again? What's your take on it, Gordon?
My take on is that the majority of the PRs right now, like roughly half of all the PRs is WIP or PRs with issues. And we are currently not reviewing those at all. It's like issues, label, or WIP.
Can we just close them if they've been open for longer than some period of time, and then like 1 or 2 weeks, and then people shouldn't be doing these long PRs, generally speaking, probably.
Yes, probably. The thing is, some of them do exist for a reason. So maybe we could introduce a label for exceptions, like keep me alive, as long as we don't abuse it. But right now, it's really throwing dust in our eyes. because we look, for example, every now and then I'd take a look and see if any of the pull requests need reviews. And I'd sift through 40 different PRs, and they'd only be able to review 2 because most of them aren't actually waiting for reviews. Even though we have 40 reviews, maybe 25 of them are waiting to be fixed or WIP or something like that.
What is actually a point of posting a WIP PR? If it's just hanging there, is it just like a signpost for everyone to see that it's being done by you? Or, why do they?
Yeah,
it also helps in terms of getting builds, CI builds. You start testing on multiple platforms. For instance, if I'm developing, let's say the Windows port PR, I will start seeing it executing on the build server and also testing that what I do doesn't break Mac OS, which I don't have a Mac machine. So in that sense, it helps. And it also becomes a place where you put, as you're doing things, you're doing the explanation there. So it's something that's gradually builds up the detail in the pull request before you remove the work in progress.
I guess on the general, there's another point around automated testing and so on. So Anton wrote some stuff in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I can speak about this. I will try to be as short as possible. So there are several examples in regarding not reliable tests. So 6764 PR, it's really rare cloud infrastructure issue. But anyway, I'm going to contact South Labs in order to find a way of avoiding such issue. Maybe some status call before running the test, like is it okay to run now, everything is stable, etc. So other 2 issues, basically are the same issues in 2 PRs, 6731 and 6752. One of them is a real issue product. It's about wrong redirection after setting up wallet after doing a transaction in chat. And it's registered, also linked. And other 2 issues, there were several attempts to fix them, but new issues came up. So we are going to disable them until being fixed. And for all issues in PRs which are failing more than once because once it's like the first occurrence, we can't predict that. But if it fails twice, we will disable them until being fixed, and then they will be re-enabled to run against HPRs. That's it.
I know we were talking before with blocking PRs. If it's
yes. Go on.
Go ahead. Blocking PRs from merging if it's 100%, but this assumes that there are no false negatives.
All right, but we can implement that, but we need to think around. But first of all, it's better to implement desktop tests against PRs first, because now we have more PRs for desktop and some PRs for mobile. I mean, we need not to block only by mobile, but to finish with desktop runs against PR, and then we will implement this feature. And if tests are false failed, it will be just disabled until being fixed. So it will solve the issue of false failure.
I'm curious, how do developers use the automated tests? Do you feel like you can trust them? Do they give useful information, or what are people's thoughts?
They do.
When the percentage is really low, usually it indicates you have a problem.
That's basically the only difference. If it's like 60% compared to 97% or something, that's the only distinction I make.
Yeah, same here. But if everything fails, if a lot of them fail, something is probably wrong, and it's a useful indication. Because sometimes the app might look fine when you run it. If you only do some things, you may even run all the unit tests and they would pass.
So are we? Is this something you want to like what would be a reasonable standard to hold ourselves with respect to this? Do we think it's good enough now, or do we feel like it can be much better, or like what's the?
No, they should be 100% all the time. So flaky tests should be disabled, and so that whenever it's not 100%, we don't merge.
Yep.
Disabled or separated.
And the only exception would be if you change a feature or something that makes a test fail because some pop-up opens or something, then I suppose it should be a 2 commits PR where the committer asks QA to fix the test. Maybe that could be a solution.
Yes, we had that approach before, but actually we've been rebasing PRs all the time, and then we've been overridden by a committer. So is it okay to make like 2 separate PRs, one from automation team, another from developer, and then it will be squashed by developer in the end?
Is there a reason developers can't write these tests? Because it seems like something that's useful to run locally. Or do we feel like it's too different?
I think there is no reason to run locally if you can just make a PR and they will run. You don't need to set up all the infrastructure. It's already done by us.
I guess what I mean is that it's part of the basic quality assurance that developers should do, that you write tests, and in this case it would be on-me tests. Or do we feel like, is that an unreasonable ask?
I think not, because you need to understand like the whole scenario of the test. You need to go much deeper, and we definitely don't need to waste developers' time for doing such things. But the only thing which can help is adding accessibility IDs for new component and not removing them from old one. By accessibility ID, I mean accessibility label thing.
Yeah, I mean, this could, if we wanted to go to that level, we could specify this in the issue, saying, okay, this accessibility ID will be added. Since we're asking to add a button, then this ID will be used, and then both the developer and the tester know what to write against.
So assuming we get to 100%, it seems like something maybe that you could be coordinated in the pull request, like, hey, I changed these things, I removed this screen, so we need to fix this and have a new one. And then you could have 2 commits, so you could rebase whatever. Like, that's something that the developer and who is writing the on-me test can figure out. But to me, it seems like we really need to get to 100%, and we've talked about it for like a very long time. So if there's some way something we can do in terms of how the infrastructure is run, what tests we have enabled, how random the sort of success is, or whatever it is, but what do we need to do to make we get to 100% like soon? And this isn't the thing that we keep talking about every month.
Okay, so getting for 100 to 100% is like we are really near. First of all, we need to make these 2 commits in one PR, as we discussed. I mean, if something changed on product level, we need to change a sub on that in the PR and to provide the commit inside the PR. And from our side, I think we will add weekly person for taking care for all PRs. And also would be great to have some kind of a status bot, or like it was with Slack, where we can get that results directly to channel to one. It would be really helpful.
So we're at 20 minutes after the hour, and we still have libp2p integration and a network from desktop devices. Do we want to move on to that?
We can briefly. I guess we can take the automate test. If we can set some form of target for that, or just coordinate outside of this meeting what we need to do. I don't know with the status. Pedro, do you want to help? Could you help out with the GitHub bot in terms of changes there?
Sure.
Cool. And then we can just make that a goal to make it blocking as soon as possible, and then start to build on that once we have 100%.
So
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the one thing that's not on the agenda that I think is quite timely is OKRs, and like I'm wondering if there's any update on that. I was hoping that some part of this meeting would be talk about that, but how are teams progressing? I don't know if people want to do an async in like a discuss post, that's fine, but like there hasn't been much progress made, and I don't like there's not a lot of visibility into how the teams are operating beyond that HackMD doc. Like team structures, things like that. Is that being documented somewhere? Is there still confusion around it? Yeah, I think that I'd like to either address now, or I can set a meeting for that.
So is it? I guess in general we would rather keep these sort of calls more technical later. I guess with OKRs, that's like how do we? Yeah, I mean, is it definitely decided that every team is going to do it? Is that definitely a decision, or what's the?
I mean, there's been no communication, right? There's been literally that's why we've got a whole bunch of people on this call right now, so we can talk about it, or we can do it. I haven't heard from anyone.
So there was a call earlier today with
I think it just cut out.
Yeah, so there was a call earlier today, and I think there's some meeting notes, and it's going to be posted to discuss. If I answered Igor correctly, I don't know with respect to other teams, if there's been some other conversations or.
I was I'll just speak up for the browser team. I was following along with the doc, Nabil, where you had suggested that we have OKRs finalized this week. We have a separate doc going for that, and we haven't made all that much progress on it because we have a planning session today for the next 2 weeks. But definitely this week we intend to finalize those.
Okay, cool. All right. So there's some progress.
I mean, come up with them in general.
There's a lot of visibility into where these are happening, but as long as progress is being made from every team also finalizing team structure and things like that, it's still unclear if people are happy with how it's going inside from the doc, or if everyone's allocation. I know Anna and the testers are still finalizing things, but other than that, it's been a little bit of radio silence. So if things are in motion, then that's fine. I'll just wait.
So I know things are in motion with core, but it's not been so much about OKRs, at least in the most recent call. But that seems like something that could be worked on this week if that's something you want to do. I don't know about the other teams. Well, like, is it a chat team? Like, what has there been some conversation in that team?
No, the chat team hasn't had the kickoff yet. That's tomorrow. And in the other teams, everyone's still kind of like forming and like, what is this team kind of stage? But I think as we have a little bit more clarity, we can start to look at OKRs once we understand what each team is doing and how it relates to the other teams.
Okay.
But we should have a much better idea at the end of this week, possibly into next as well.
Okay, perfect.
I would agree that it's a bit premature to talk about OKRs at the moment until we all figure out exactly what each product or part of the products are supposed to be doing.
Roles and responsibilities.
I'll be sending out an email to the individual people in the team, just asking just for their sort of feedback on like what they want status to be, what they think is like in other competitors that we want to like features that we'd like to see in and that sort of thing. For the whole application, but particular focus on the segment of the product that they're working on. I'll do that later today. That'll be an individual responsibility for everybody. So everyone who I email on that for each respective team, it would be great if you could individually send those in. Once we get that, I will review it and then it'd be nice if we can then go from that to identifying which of those features are like low-hanging fruit and high impact to the users. We'll find out what is the sort of difficulty, manpower-ish, vaguely, very rough, doesn't have to be like super formal or anything like that. And from there, we'll have a better understanding of what the direction is for each segment of the product. And then we can start thinking about OKRs then if we think it's necessary or not. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Sounds good.
I guess we have a few more minutes to go. Is there some last words on the sort of engineer practice people want to bring up? Right, and then I think we had, yeah, go ahead. Nabil?
Oh, no, sorry, I'm going back.
And then we have, I guess we don't have that much to talk about it, but Dimitri on libp2p and then Andrea on Whisper and Wallet Keys, if you just want to briefly mention.
Yeah, I can mention it, but well, I don't know if there's any time to have any discussion about it. So like, I don't see a point, to be honest, to mention about it. I wanted to have a follow-up about Discuss post and hear what are people's opinions or concerns about it, like, or anything really. But we can skip actually. Yeah.
I mean, libp2p sounds like it makes a lot of sense when we're talking about replacing dev-p2p entirely with that. But that's always seemed like a Go Ethereum thing. I guess I'm a little confused how that relates to Status Go. And if we're running dev-p2p and libp2p on a mobile device for status, I'm a little unclear on what the goal is there.
Well, the goal is to connect libp2p devices to other libp2p devices and dev-p2p devices to Ethereum network, because this is how we are currently running our application anyway. So if you are using OS on mobile, you are still connected to those full nodes, and we can connect our Whisper devices to other Whisper devices. And the main benefit of using libp2p there is to use tools that they already have to bypass net, for example. Yeah. So that was the main. Well, there is no technical difficulty running libp2p connected to libp2p and dev-p2p connected to dev-p2p. Yeah, so that was my main point.
So we're implementing a JavaScript in JavaScript Whisper. I mean, me, Barry, and Richard, and we also want to integrate libp2p in the context of the JavaScript project. And the hope is that this way, dApps generated by Embark, they could connect to that to libp2p through the browser. But the problem is that they're essentially different networks. But if the status nodes support both, then we can have a bridge between them. So this way, people potentially could use dApps that connect directly to status.
So my understanding is that we're talking about like a status daemon, say like that runs on a server, for example. But we're talking about the mobile application. Is that correct?
I understood we're talking about the mobile application. It supports both networks, so this way we have a connection. Everyone acts as a bridge between them, so we have more coverage this way.
Okay, I guess my concern with that is, I mean, that sounds great, and I understand the goal there. Like, ideally, you wouldn't jump between networks. So Serenity will be moving towards libp2p, and like Ethereum will be moving towards libp2p. So we can consider dev-p2p to be deprecated in the sort of medium to long term. I guess the major concern that I have with it being implemented on the mobile application would be the resource consumption. We're trying to put so much efforts into actually trying to make this usable on a mobile application, but maintaining a Cadme network is pretty difficult. I don't know if we are intending to do that or if we want to have static peers, and if it's any different. It'd be great to get some benchmarks on what that looks like if we want to roll out into release. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay, but just a brief comment. Like, we use Discovery, and maintaining Kademlia networks is only about Discovery here. And we use Discovery for limited amount of time until we find required number of peers, and after that we shut down it. So there is no additional overhead of maintaining another Kademlia network or maintaining Kademlia network all the time. So the libp2p in this case is only about transfer between peers.
Okay, and do we have statistics on like how much bandwidth we're using by consuming these different connections, and how many connections we intend to keep open?
Well, I'm not sure what kind of statistics you are talking about. So,
well, bandwidth use is if you enable this or not, and depending on how long you're on Discovery and how many peers are connected and these types of things, right?
So we limit number of peers we will connect to, and yeah.
Yeah, there's just also one more peer that we are. I think it's already it's ready on Status Go side. It's gonna enable collecting metrics from Status Go. So this get metrics on a mobile device. So it's gonna be possible to display, like for example, how much data consumed Discover version 5, how much data discovered consumed Whisper, and so on and so forth. So it's like a per API per module. These things like the modules individually into those metrics. So
that sounds amazing. Yeah, thank you, Adam.
Sure, but I think like the transfer related to Discover is not. It's marginal. It's only at the beginning when you have this open, like the Discover is running, like Dimitri said. So later we do not actively maintain anything.
Yeah,
so
I think I understand. So my major concern here is just that we're too ad hoc in terms of like deploying this stuff, and we don't really understand like the impact of these implementations. So getting more metrics on these things, like you just mentioned, Adam, is absolutely imperative that we do that before we start thinking about putting this into release binaries. Yes. But the experimentation and the general idea, I think, is fantastic. So yeah, great job, Dimitri, on being forward thinking in that manner.
Yep. Cool. I guess we are running out of time. Any sort of final mini announcement before we end this call?
It's snowing here, so there's that.
Yeah, it's snowing in Vienna too. So.
By the way, where are you located in?
I'm in Montreal. I should have.
Okay.
Wait, who's in Montreal?
I am Bruce.
Oh, okay. Right. I'm in Montreal, and it's definitely snowing. Yeah.
Oh, you're in Montreal too?
Yeah.
Who else is in Montreal? Who is it?
Jonathan is also in Montreal.
Oh, really? We got to get together. My God, that's just crazy.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised. So, anyway, let's not hijack the call.
Let's end on this ad hoc matchmaking session. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Montreal next time.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you, bye.